Dr. Lisa Carter pressed her face against the cold metal window of the research vessel New Horizon and stared at Europa's frozen surface far below. The ice moon of Jupiter had always fascinated her, but today something felt different. Her instruments were picking up energy readings that made no sense according to everything she knew about this dead world. "Jake, come look at this," she called to the engineer working at the next station. Jake Morrison wiped his greasy hands on a cloth and walked over to where Lisa sat, surrounded by glowing screens and blinking lights. "What am I looking at?" Jake asked as he squinted at the colorful display showing Europa's surface scans. "There's something down there," Lisa said, pointing at a section of the readout that pulsed with strange patterns. "The energy signature is unlike anything we've seen before. It's coming from deep beneath the ice sheets, maybe 20 kilometers down." Amy Walsh looked up from her communications console where she had been trying to establish better contact with Earth. The signal delay to Jupiter was already frustrating enough without having to deal with equipment that seemed to be acting strangely today. "How deep did you say?" "That's impossible. Nothing could survive down there." Lisa shook her head and pulled up more data on her screens. "That's what I thought too, but look at these readings. The energy pattern is artificial. This isn't some natural geological process. Someone or something built whatever is generating this signal." Commander Paul Rodriguez entered the main laboratory area just as Lisa finished speaking. He was a tall man with graying hair who had spent most of his career exploring the outer planets and their moons. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought until he heard what his science team was discussing. "Did I hear correctly? You think there's artificial technology under Europa's ice?" Paul asked as he moved closer to examine the data for himself. "The readings don't lie, Commander," Lisa replied. "Whatever is down there has been dormant for a very long time, but it's starting to wake up. The energy output has increased by 30% just in the last 6 hours. Jake scratched his head and looked puzzled. "But that would mean this thing has been there for thousands of years, maybe longer. Who could have built it?" Amy turned away from her console with a worried expression. "Commander, I'm getting some strange interference on our communication channels. It started about the same time Dr. Carter detected those energy readings. Paul studied the data displays and made a decision that would change everything for his crew and for humanity itself. We're going down there. Jake, prep the drilling equipment. Amy, send a message to Earth Command letting them know what we've found. Lisa, I want you to prepare everything we'll need for a deep excavation." The next few hours passed quickly as the crew prepared for their descent to Europa's surface. The drilling operation was complex and dangerous. One mistake could flood their equipment with the liquid water that existed beneath the thick ice shell. But the mysterious energy readings continued to grow stronger, as if whatever was down there knew they were coming. Lisa stood in the airlock as they prepared to launch the drilling probe. Through the small window, she could see Europa's white surface stretching endlessly in all directions. Somewhere far below lay something that might rewrite everything humans thought they knew about their place in the universe. The drilling probe descended slowly through the ice, sending back images and data as it went deeper. For the first few kilometers, everything looked normal. Just ice and more ice with occasional pockets of liquid water. But as they reached the 15-kilometer mark, the probe's cameras began to pick up something unusual. "Commander, you need to see this," Jake called out from his monitoring station. On the screen was an image that made everyone in the room fall silent. The ice had given way to what looked like worked stone. Smooth walls covered in strange markings stretched away into the darkness beyond the probe's lights. "Those are definitely artificial structures," Lisa whispered as she examined the images more closely. "Look at the precision of those cuts. And these symbols, they're arranged in patterns like some kind of writing system." Amy had been monitoring the communication systems when something even stranger began to happen. "Commander, I'm picking up what sounds like voices on the communication channels, but they're not speaking any language I recognize." Paul ordered the probe to continue deeper into the structures. What they found defied all logical explanation. Vast chambers carved from solid rock stretched out in all directions. The walls were covered with crystalline formations that pulsed with soft light, and everywhere there were more of those strange symbols, arranged in complex patterns that seemed to tell some kind of story. "The energy readings are off the charts now," Lisa reported as she watched her instruments carefully. "Whatever powers this place is still active after all this time." As the probe moved deeper into the complex, it discovered something that made the entire crew step back in shock. The walls of one large chamber were covered with images that looked disturbingly familiar. There were pictures of beings that looked almost human, but not quite, and surrounding these figures were scenes that seemed to depict the history of Earth itself. "That can't be right," Jake said as he stared at the images. "Look at this sequence here. It shows the development of agriculture, the rise of cities, even what looks like the Industrial Revolution. But how could anyone down there know about Earth's history?" Lisa felt a strange sensation as she studied the images. It was as if she had seen them before in a dream she couldn't quite remember. The crystalline formations on the walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Without thinking, she reached out to touch one of the crystal surfaces on the probe's camera feed. The moment her finger made contact with the control screen, everything changed. Suddenly, Lisa could see visions of Earth's past flowing through her mind like a river of memories that weren't her own. She saw early humans discovering fire, but in her vision there were shadowy figures standing just out of sight, guiding and protecting. She saw the first cities being built, and again those same mysterious guardians were there, influencing events from the darkness. "Lisa, what's happening?" Amy asked with concern as she watched her colleague stand frozen with her hand pressed against the screen. But Lisa couldn't respond. The visions were becoming stronger and more detailed. She saw great disasters that had threatened to destroy humanity, and each time those shadowy protectors had intervened to save her species. Asteroids deflected from collision courses with Earth, plagues that mysteriously ended just before they could wipe out entire populations, wars that stopped at the moment when they might have led to total destruction. When the visions finally ended, Lisa collapsed into her chair, breathing heavily. The rest of the crew gathered around her with worried expressions. "What did you see?" Paul asked gently. Lisa looked up at her companions with eyes that held a new understanding of humanity's place in the universe. "We're not alone," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "We've never been alone. Someone has been watching over us, protecting us, guiding our development for thousands of years." "Who?" Jake asked. Lisa turned back to the screen showing the ancient structures beneath Europa's ice. "I don't know yet, but they're down there, and I think they've been waiting for us to find them." The descent to the structures beneath Europa took 3 days of careful drilling and excavation. Lisa Carter found herself unable to sleep during those long hours, haunted by the visions she had experienced when touching the probe's controls. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those shadowy figures moving through human history like ghosts, protecting children who didn't know they existed. Jake Morrison worked tirelessly to expand the access tunnel they had created through the ice. His drilling equipment had never been designed for this kind of operation, but somehow everything was working perfectly. Too perfectly, he thought to himself as he watched systems that should have failed hours ago continue to function flawlessly. Amy Walsh maintained constant communication with the surface crew, though the messages she was receiving from Earth Command were becoming increasingly urgent. Word of their discovery had reached the highest levels of government, and ships were already being dispatched from Earth to Jupiter. But it would take months for any reinforcements to arrive. Commander Paul Rodriguez studied the layout of the underground complex as their probes mapped more and more of the vast structure. What they had found was not just a building or even a city. It was an entire civilization buried beneath 20 kilometers of ice, preserved perfectly by the cold and darkness. "The architecture doesn't match anything in our historical records," Lisa observed as she examined the probe data. "These construction techniques are far more advanced than anything humans have ever achieved. But there's something familiar about the proportions and design." When the tunnel was finally complete, the team prepared for their first physical descent into the alien complex. They wore environmental suits designed for the harshest conditions in space. But as they descended through the tunnel, the temperature readings showed the ancient structures were somehow maintaining a comfortable environment. "That's impossible," Jake muttered as he checked his instruments. "The temperature down here should be well below freezing, but my readings show it's actually warmer than our ship." They emerged from the tunnel into a vast chamber that stretched beyond the reach of their lights. The walls were covered with those same crystalline formations they had seen on the probe feeds, but seeing them in person was completely different. The crystals pulsed with a soft, warm light that seemed to respond to their presence. As they moved deeper into the complex, following corridors that seemed to have been designed for beings roughly human-sized, they began to hear sounds, not the mechanical humming of machinery, but something that sounded almost like whispered conversations in a language none of them recognized. "Are we sure this place has been abandoned?" Amy asked nervously as she adjusted her communication equipment. "Because it really doesn't feel empty." They rounded a corner and found themselves facing something that made them all stop in their tracks. Standing in the middle of a circular chamber was a figure that looked almost human, but not quite. It was tall and thin, with elongated limbs and features that seemed somehow familiar yet alien at the same time. "Welcome," the figure said in perfect English, though its mouth barely moved. "We have been waiting for you to find us." Paul instinctively reached for the weapon at his side but found himself unable to move. Not because he was being held by some force, but because something deep inside told him this being meant no harm. "Who are you?" Lisa asked, stepping forward despite her companion's worried expressions. "I am Elder Vex," the figure replied. "I am one of the keepers, and we are your children." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about reality. Jake was the first to find his voice. "Our children? That's impossible. You're clearly not human." Elder Vex moved closer, and they could see that beneath the alien features were traces of something unmistakably human. The bone structure, the way it carried itself, even the expression in its large dark eyes all spoke of a connection to humanity that went deeper than mere resemblance. "We are what humanity becomes," Elder Vex explained. "In our timeline, Earth was destroyed when your species was still young. But before the end came, we learned to travel through time itself. We came back to this timeline to ensure that humanity would survive and grow strong enough to face the darkness that consumed our world." Amy shook her head in disbelief. "Time travel? You expect us to believe you're from the future?" Instead of answering with words, Elder Vex gestured toward the crystalline walls. Suddenly, the chamber filled with images that seemed to hang in the air around them. They saw Earth as it appeared millions of years ago, and then watched as the planet's history unfolded in fast forward. But this was not the Earth they knew from their history books. In these visions, shadowy figures moved through key moments in human development, subtly influencing events. They watched as early humans discovered fire, but saw that the discovery came after one of these guardians had demonstrated the technique while remaining just out of sight. Every major advancement in human history was guided, Elder Vex said as the images continued to flow around them. The development of language, the agricultural revolution, the discovery of metals, the invention of writing. We were there for all of it, ensuring that humanity would develop the traits and technologies needed to survive what is coming. Lisa stared at the visions with growing understanding. The aggressive nature of humans, our rapid technological advancement, our refusal to give up even when facing impossible odds. "These aren't random evolutionary traits." "Correct," Elder Vex confirmed. "Your species was shaped specifically to fight an enemy that has already consumed countless civilizations across the galaxy. The darkness that destroyed our Earth is returning, and this time humanity must be ready." Paul finally found his voice. "What kind of enemy are we talking about?" The images around them shifted to show something that made them all step back in horror. Vast creatures that seemed to be made of living shadow moved between the stars, consuming entire worlds. Wherever they passed, life simply ceased to exist, leaving behind nothing but empty space. "They call themselves the Void Spawn," Elder Vex explained. "They are older than most galaxies, and they feed on the life force of entire civilizations. They have been sleeping between the stars for millions of years, but now they are beginning to wake." Jake stared at the images of destruction with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "And you think humans can fight these things? We can barely manage to stop fighting among ourselves." "That is exactly why you can fight them," Elder Vex replied. "Other species we have observed became peaceful and unified as they advanced. When the Void Spawn came for them, they had no concept of warfare, no experience with conflict. They fell without resistance." The images shifted again to show various alien civilizations encountering the Void Spawn. In every case, the aliens attempted to communicate or negotiate, only to be consumed without mercy. Their peaceful nature, which had served them well in building advanced societies, became their greatest weakness when faced with an enemy that knew only hunger. "Humans are different," Elder Vex continued. "Your species has spent its entire existence fighting, competing, struggling against adversity. You have developed weapons and tactics, but more importantly, you have developed the will to fight even when victory seems impossible. Amy looked around at the ancient complex surrounding them. How long have you been down here? How long have you been watching us? We have been guiding your development for over 50,000 years, Elder Vex answered. Every time your species faced extinction, we intervened subtly to ensure survival. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs was deflected by our technology to miss Earth by a few thousand kilometers, allowing mammals to thrive. The ice ages were shortened by our climate manipulation. The plagues that swept through your civilizations were contained before they could destroy your growing populations completely. Lisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of Europa. You've been manipulating our entire history. We have been protecting you, Elder Vex corrected. Everything we did was to ensure that when this moment came, humanity would be strong enough and numerous enough to stand against the darkness. Paul looked around at his team and made a decision that would change the course of human history. What do you need us to do? Elder Vex's alien features shifted into what might have been a smile. The time for hidden protection is ending. The Void Spawn have detected your rapid advancement and are already moving toward this solar system. Humanity must be told the truth and prepared for open warfare. The chamber filled with new images showing human settlements across the galaxy, all unknowingly positioned by Keeper influence to create a defensive network against the coming invasion. Space stations, colonies, and research outposts that seemed randomly placed were actually part of a vast strategic plan developed over thousands of years. We will share our technology and knowledge with you, Elder Vex said, but the fighting must be done by humans. Only your species has the combination of aggression, adaptability, and determination needed to defeat an enemy that has consumed entire galaxies. As the implications of what they were hearing began to sink in, the team realized that their simple exploration mission had just become something far more significant. Elder Vex led the human team deeper into the Keeper complex, through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly beneath Europa's frozen surface. The crystalline formations on the walls grew more complex as they walked, creating patterns that hurt to look at, directly but somehow conveyed vast amounts of information to anyone who tried to understand them. Your minds are not yet equipped to process the full scope of what we have preserved here, Elder Vex explained as Lisa Carter stumbled slightly while trying to read the crystal patterns. But we can show you the most important parts of your hidden history. They entered a chamber that was unlike anything they had seen before. The room was perfectly spherical, with no visible floor or ceiling. As soon as they stepped inside, they found themselves floating in what appeared to be empty space, surrounded by points of light that gradually resolved into stars. This is our temporal viewing chamber, Elder Vex said. Here we can observe any moment in Earth's history in any timeline. We have been watching and recording everything. Jake Morrison looked around nervously as the stars began to move, forming new constellations. Is this safe? I mean, we're not actually traveling through time, are we? You are observing only, Elder Vex assured him. But what you see will be as real as your own memories. The stars suddenly rushed toward them, and they found themselves standing on a hillside overlooking a vast plain. In the distance, they could see early humans gathered around a fire, but there was something wrong with the scene. The fire kept going out despite the humans' efforts to maintain it. This is 65,000 years ago, Elder Vex explained. Your species had just learned to create fire, but they had not yet mastered the technique. Without fire, they would not have survived the coming winter. As they watched, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness near the human camp. The being was tall and thin like Elder Vex, but somehow different, more obviously alien. It moved carefully around the edge of the camp, staying just out of sight while demonstrating proper fire-making techniques. One of our early operatives, Elder Vex said. We had to be much more direct in those days. Your ancestors' minds were not ready for subtle influence. Amy Walsh watched as the humans gradually learned to maintain their fire properly. You taught them directly? When necessary, Elder Vex replied. But we learned that direct intervention created dependency. Humans needed to believe they were discovering things on their own, or they would not develop the independence and creativity we needed them to have. The scene shifted, and they found themselves in ancient Mesopotamia, watching the development of the first cities. But again, there were those shadowy figures moving through the crowds, never directly interacting but somehow influencing events. A word whispered here, a demonstration there, a subtle push in the right direction. The development of writing, mathematics, metallurgy, Elder Vex narrated as the scenes flowed around them. all guided by our operatives working through dreams, inspiration, and careful manipulation of circumstances. Commander Paul Rodriguez studied the alien figures moving through human history. Why the secrecy? Why not just reveal yourselves and help directly? Because we tried that in our original timeline, Elder Vex replied sadly. When the void spawn came to our Earth, humanity had been guided too directly. They were advanced technologically, but dependent on their guardians. When the attack came, they looked to us for salvation instead of fighting themselves. We failed them, and they died. The temporal chamber shifted again, showing them the destruction of Earth in that other timeline. They watched in horror as the void spawn descended on their home planet, consuming everything while humans stood helplessly, waiting for their protectors to save them. Never again, Elder Vex said firmly. In this timeline, humanity must be strong enough to save themselves. We can provide tools and knowledge, but the fighting spirit must come from within. Marine Colonel Steve Hunter had remained silent during most of the presentation, but now he stepped forward. Show me the wars. If you've been guiding our military development, I want to see how. The chamber responded to his request, displaying scenes of conflict throughout human history. But these were not the battles that appeared in history books. They watched as Keeper operatives subtly influenced weapon development, ensuring that humans would always maintain a technological edge in warfare. The development of gunpowder, the invention of artillery, the creation of aircraft, Elder Vex explained. Every advancement that made your species more effective in combat was guided by our hand. Dr. Kate Lewis, the expedition's xenobiologist, studied the patterns of intervention with scientific interest. You've been breeding us for war, selecting for aggressive traits, eliminating peaceful tendencies. Not eliminating, Elder Vex corrected. Balancing. Humans needed to retain compassion and cooperation, or they would destroy themselves before the real enemy arrived. But they also needed the will to fight when fighting was necessary. The scenes shifted to show moments when human conflicts had been subtly prevented from escalating too far, wars that mysteriously ended just before they could become truly devastating, nuclear weapons that failed at critical moments, preventing global destruction. We have been walking a careful line for thousands of years, Elder Vex explained, keeping humanity aggressive enough to fight the void spawn, but peaceful enough to survive until that fight arrives. Dr. Martin Gray, the expedition's military strategist, focused on the tactical aspects of what they were seeing. These aren't random interventions. There's a pattern here, a long-term strategy. Correct, Elder Vex confirmed. Every human settlement beyond Earth, every space station and colony, was positioned according to our strategic plan. Your species believes they are exploring randomly, but they are actually building a defensive network. The chamber displayed a map of human expansion throughout the solar system and beyond. What had seemed like haphazard exploration revealed itself as a carefully planned military deployment. Bases positioned to cover all approaches to Earth, manufacturing centers located where they could quickly supply frontline positions, research facilities placed where they could develop new weapons and defenses, the asteroid mining operations, the Mars terraforming projects, the research stations around Jupiter, Elder Vex continued, all positioned to support the coming war effort. Lisa stared at the strategic map with growing understanding. The whole expansion of human civilization has been preparation for a war we didn't even know was coming. More than that, Elder Vex said. Certain humans throughout your history have been touched by our influence. These individuals became your greatest leaders, inventors, and visionaries, unknowingly serving as conduits for our guidance. The chamber filled with images of familiar historical figures, but now the humans could see the subtle signs of Keeper influence surrounding them. Scientists who made breakthrough discoveries after mysterious dreams, military leaders who developed innovative tactics following strange inspirations, politicians who made crucial decisions based on inexplicable hunches. Einstein, Churchill, Tesla, Washington, Elder Vex named them as their images appeared, all touched by our operatives, though they never knew it. Their greatest achievements came from accessing knowledge we planted in their subconscious minds. Jake shook his head in amazement. How many people throughout history have been influenced this way? More than you might think, fewer than you might fear, Elder Vex replied. We have always been careful not to interfere too much with human free will. The touched were chosen for their existing potential, not created by our intervention. The scenes shifted one final time, showing recent events that the team recognized from their own lifetimes. Space exploration missions that had seemed routine were revealed to have hidden purposes. Scientific discoveries that had appeared accidental were shown to be carefully orchestrated. Even their own mission to Europa had been subtly influenced to ensure they would find the Keeper complex. "You brought us here," Paul realized. "Our entire mission was manipulated to lead to this discovery." "The time for hidden guidance is ending," Elder Vex confirmed. "The Void Spawn have detected humanity's rapid advancement and are already moving toward this solar system. Your species must now be told the truth and prepared for open warfare." Amy looked around at her companions, seeing the same mix of awe and fear in their faces that she felt herself. "How long do we have?" "Less than 5 years," Elder Vex replied. "The first scouts will arrive within 3 years, followed by the main force. By then, humanity must be ready to fight a war unlike anything your species has ever imagined." The temporal chamber began to fade, returning them to the crystalline corridors of the Keeper complex. But the images they had seen would remain with them forever, changing their understanding of humanity's place in the universe and their role in the approaching cosmic conflict. "What happens now?" Lisa asked as they followed Elder Vex back through the ancient halls. "Now we begin the final phase of preparation," Elder Vex replied. "We will share our technology and knowledge with humanity. But remember, the fighting must be done by humans. Only your species has the combination of traits needed to defeat an enemy that has consumed entire galaxies." As they walked through the corridors filled with alien technology and ancient wisdom, the journey back to Earth took 6 months, but those 6 months changed everything for humanity. While the New Horizon crew worked with Elder Vex and the other Keepers to understand their advanced technology, the Keepers were preparing what they called the Awakening Protocol. Every communication satellite, every television broadcast system, every internet connection on Earth will carry our message simultaneously, Elder Vex explained to Lisa Carter, as they worked together in the Keeper technology chambers. "Humanity must hear the truth all at once, or panic and disbelief will make preparation impossible." Captain Helen Baker had arrived with a fleet of ships from Earth Command, bringing military advisors and government representatives who struggled to accept what they were being told. The evidence was overwhelming, but the implications were so vast that many simply refused to believe. "You're asking us to accept that our entire history has been manipulated by time-traveling descendants," General Frank Davis said during one of the briefings, "and now you want us to prepare for war against cosmic monsters that eat galaxies." Elder Vex remained patient despite the skepticism. "We understand your doubt, General, but doubt will not stop the Void Spawn from arriving. They are already past the outer edge of your solar system." The proof came in the form of long-range sensor readings that showed massive objects moving between the planets at speeds that defied current human understanding of physics. The objects were too large to be ships and too organized to be natural phenomena. President Elizabeth Stone received the first classified briefing about the situation while sitting in the Oval Office on a quiet Tuesday morning. By that evening, she was on a secure video conference with world leaders, trying to explain something that sounded like the plot of a science fiction movie. "The evidence is undeniable," she told the assembled heads of state. "We are facing a threat that makes all of our previous conflicts seem like playground disputes." Some leaders accepted the revelation immediately. Premier Chen Wei of the Chinese Federation had been expecting something like this ever since their deep space monitoring stations had detected the anomalous readings near Jupiter. Prime Minister Sarah Thompson of the European Union had already begun quietly mobilizing research teams. Others were less cooperative. President Viktor Petrov of the Russian Republic demanded physical proof before he would commit any resources to what he called an elaborate American deception. Several smaller nations simply refused to participate in any planning sessions. The Awakening Protocol activated on a Thursday morning at precisely 12 GMT. Every screen on Earth, from massive billboards in Times Square to smartphones in remote villages, suddenly displayed the same image. Elder Vex appeared on every device simultaneously, speaking in perfect versions of every human language. "People of Earth," the message began, "we are the Keepers and we are your children from a timeline that no longer exists. We have been protecting and guiding your species for 50,000 years, preparing you for a war that begins today. Senator William Clark was in the middle of a committee hearing when every screen in the Capitol building switched to the Keeper broadcast. His first instinct was to assume it was some kind of terrorist hack, but as the message continued and provided proof after proof of its authenticity, he realized the world had just changed forever. The enemy approaching your world calls itself the Void Spawn. Elder Vex continued in the broadcast. They have consumed countless civilizations across this galaxy and others. Your species represents the only hope for stopping them, but only if you accept the truth and prepare to fight. Religious leader Father Joseph Martinez was conducting morning service when the church's sound system began playing the Keeper message. His congregation looked to him for guidance, and after listening to the full revelation, he made a decision that would shape the church's response to the crisis. This is not a contradiction of our faith, he told his congregation. This is the fulfillment of it. We have always believed that we are protected by forces beyond our understanding. Now we know the nature of that protection. Dr. Nancy Peterson was in her laboratory at MIT when the broadcast began. As a theoretical physicist, she had spent her career studying the fundamental forces of the universe. The technology displayed in the Keeper message answered questions she had been struggling with for decades. Energy manipulation systems they're showing us, she told her research team as they watched the broadcast together. This is generations beyond anything we've achieved, maybe centuries beyond. The global reaction was immediate and chaotic. Stock markets crashed as investors panicked about the implications of an alien invasion. Religious groups split between those who saw the Keepers as divine messengers and those who denounced them as demons. Governments struggled to maintain order as their citizens demanded answers to questions no one had ever needed to ask before. But underneath the chaos, something remarkable began to happen. Human ingenuity and adaptability, the very traits the Keepers had been cultivating for millennia, started to manifest on a global scale. Within hours of the broadcast, volunteer engineers were working around the clock to understand the technical specifications that Elder Vex had shared. Military strategists were analyzing the tactical information about void spawn capabilities and weaknesses. Scientists were forming international teams to study the new technologies being offered by the Keepers. Captain Rick Foster was commanding a patrol ship near the asteroid belt when the first void spawn scouts arrived. His initial sensor readings showed 3 objects roughly the size of small moons, but moving with purpose and intelligence rather than following orbital mechanics. Command, this is Foster. I've got visual contact with unknown objects in Sector 7. They don't match anything in our databases. The objects were unlike anything in human experience. They seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating zones of absolute darkness against the star field. When Foster's ship tried to scan them with active sensors, the beams simply disappeared without producing any return signal. They're not just dark, Foster reported to Earth Command. They're eating the light itself. Elder Vex had warned that the Void Spawn scouts would test human responses before the main force arrived. These initial encounters would determine how the enemy would approach the coming invasion. Foster's tactical training took over as he maneuvered his ship to avoid direct confrontation while gathering as much intelligence as possible. The Void Spawn scouts seemed content to observe for now, but their very presence was changing the fundamental nature of space around them. Command, I'm reading massive gravitational distortions around the unknown objects. They're not just absorbing electromagnetic radiation, they're actually warping space-time itself. Back on Earth, the Keepers were working frantically to share their defensive technologies with human engineers. The energy shield generators that had protected their ships for millions of years were being adapted for human vessels and installations. General Davis found himself in command of the largest military mobilization in human history. Every nation was contributing resources, even those whose leaders had initially resisted. The threat was too large for any single country to face alone. We're not fighting for America or China or any individual nation, he told his staff during a planning session. We're fighting for the survival of our species. The Keeper technology was revolutionary but also dangerous. The energy systems operated on principles that human science barely understood. Several early test installations suffered catastrophic failures that reminded everyone how much they still had to learn. Dr. Nancy Peterson led the effort to understand and improve the Keeper designs. We can't just copy their technology, she explained to her international team. We need to understand it well enough to maintain and improve it ourselves. Lisa Carter worked directly with Elder Vex to establish communication protocols between human and Keeper forces. The coming war would require unprecedented cooperation between species that had evolved millions of years apart. Your people learn quickly, Elder Vex observed as he watched human engineers successfully activate their first energy shield generator. Perhaps more quickly than we expected. Amy Walsh coordinated the massive communication effort required to keep Earth's scattered military units informed about enemy movements and tactical developments. The Void Spawn Scouts were probing human defenses, testing response times and capabilities. They're learning about us just as much as we're learning about them, she reported during a strategy meeting. Every engagement gives them more information about human capabilities. Jake Morrison found himself leading teams of engineers who were retrofitting human ships and installations with Keeper technology. The work was dangerous and often deadly, but the alternative was the complete extinction of everything they loved. We're asking people to risk their lives working with technology. We barely understand, he told Commander Paul Rodriguez during one of their regular check-ins, but they're volunteering faster than we can train them. As the first year of preparation drew to a close, humanity had achieved things that should have taken decades or centuries. The combination of Keeper knowledge and human determination was producing results that amazed even Elder Vex and his people. But the Void Spawn Scouts were also preparing. The main Void Spawn force arrived on a Tuesday morning when Earth's long-range sensors detected massive distortions at the edge of the solar system. What emerged from those distortions defied every human understanding of physics and biology. The entities were the size of small planets, but they moved with purpose and intelligence that spoke of ancient malevolence. Admiral Susan Wright stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned battleship Terra's Shield, watching her tactical displays fill with contacts that shouldn't exist. Each void spawn entity registered as a massive gravitational anomaly that bent space around itself, creating pockets of absolute darkness that seemed to consume reality itself. All ships report ready status, her communications officer announced. The combined human Keeper fleet is holding position at the asteroid belt. Elder Vex stood beside Admiral Wright, his alien features showing strain that hadn't been there during their months of preparation. The Prime Hunger leads them, he said quietly, the entity that destroyed our original Earth. It remembers us, and it will not make the same mistakes twice. Dr. Chris Taylor monitored the planet-wide defense network from his command center, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Every major city on Earth was now protected by Keeper energy shields, and orbital defense platforms surrounded the planet like a metallic constellation. But he knew that if the space battles were lost, Earth's ground defenses would only delay the inevitable. All planetary systems show green, he reported to the Global Command Network. But Chris, these readings can't be right. The amount of energy the Void Spawn are generating is off the charts, Lieutenant. Commander Alex Brooks commanded one of the fast attack squadrons positioned near Mars. His ships were equipped with the most advanced human Keeper hybrid technology available. But as he watched the enemy approach, he wondered if any amount of preparation would be sufficient. Squadron leaders, this is Brooks. Remember your training and trust your equipment. We've never faced anything like this before, but neither has any other species. That's going to be our advantage. The first engagement began when Void Spawn Scouts moved to probe the outer defensive perimeter. Captain Rick Foster, now commanding a heavy cruiser, led the initial response force. The battle was unlike anything in human military history. Target acquired, Foster announced as his weapons officer locked onto one of the smaller Void Spawn entities, firing Keeper energy weapons. The beams that lanced out from Foster's ship were not lasers or particle weapons, but streams of pure force that interacted directly with the fabric of spacetime. When they struck the Void Spawn Scout, the creature's dark form writhed and began to dissolve. Direct hit, Foster reported with amazement. The target is breaking apart. The Keeper weapons actually work. But the victory was short-lived. The dying Void Spawn entity suddenly expanded, releasing a wave of psychic energy that hit the human crews like a physical blow. Most alien species would have been driven insane by the mental assault, but humans proved surprisingly resistant to the attack. All ships report crew status, Foster called out as he shook off the disorienting effects of the psychic wave. We're getting reports of headaches and nausea, but no one's been incapacitated. Elder Vex had warned them about this aspect of void spawn tactics. The creatures used fear and despair as weapons, driving their enemies to suicide or madness before closing for the kill. But humans had spent their entire evolutionary history dealing with fear, and their minds had developed defenses that other species lacked. The main battle began when the Prime Hunger itself moved toward the inner solar system. The entity was impossibly vast, a creature of living darkness that warped space around itself so severely that nearby asteroids simply ceased to exist. Admiral Wright coordinated the human response from her flagship, directing hundreds of ships in a carefully planned attack pattern. The strategy was based on thousands of years of human warfare experience, adapted for three-dimensional space combat on a scale never before attempted. All squadrons, execute attack pattern Delta, Wright commanded. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and don't give them time to coordinate a response. The human fleet attacked with a ferocity that caught the void spawn off guard. While other species had tried to communicate or negotiate with the cosmic predators, humans simply opened fire with everything they had. The combined human keeper weapons tore into the enemy formations with devastating effect. Sergeant Tony Miller led ground forces on Europa, where void spawn landing craft had attempted to establish a foothold near the Keeper complex. The creatures that emerged from those craft were nightmarish combinations of shadow and flesh. But Miller's troops adapted quickly to fighting an enemy that defied conventional tactics. Use the flame units, Miller shouted to his soldiers as they battled creatures that seemed to absorb conventional weapons fire. The Keepers were right about fire being effective against these things. The ground battle on Europa revealed something important about human nature. While other species might have retreated in the face of such overwhelming horror, human soldiers adapted and overcame. They found ways to hurt creatures that had seemed invulnerable, and they maintained their fighting spirit even when facing odds that should have broken their morale. Dr. Nancy Peterson worked frantically in her laboratory to analyze captured void spawn technology and biology. What she discovered changed the entire understanding of the enemy they were fighting. They're not really alive in any sense we understand, she reported to the Global Command Network. They're more like a cosmic infection, a force of entropy that consumes organized matter and energy. But that gives us an advantage. The breakthrough came when Peterson realized that the void spawn's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their ability to consume and absorb energy made them nearly invulnerable to most attacks, but it also made them predictable. They always moved toward the largest concentrations of life and energy. We can use that against them, Peterson explained to Admiral Wright during a tactical briefing. If we create artificial energy sources, we can lure them into traps. The turning point of the war came during the Battle of Jupiter's Moons. Admiral Wright had positioned her fleet around the gas giant's largest satellites, using them as both defensive positions and bait for the enemy. When the Prime Hunger moved to consume the energy-rich moons, it fell into a carefully prepared ambush. All ships execute Protocol Omega, Wright commanded as hundreds of human and keeper vessels opened fire simultaneously from concealed positions among the moons. The coordinated attack succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. The Prime Hunger, wounded and disoriented by the unexpected assault, began to retreat toward the outer solar system. For the first time in its ancient existence, the cosmic predator was experiencing defeat. Lieutenant Commander Brooks led the pursuit force that chased the retreating void spawn. His ships harried the enemy formations, preventing them from regrouping and launching counterattacks. The hit-and-run tactics were pure human innovation, based on centuries of guerrilla warfare experience. They don't understand what we're doing, Brooks reported as he watched confused void spawn entities trying to respond to human tactics. They're used to enemies that fight in predictable patterns. Our unpredictability is driving them crazy. The final battle took place in the space between Mars and Jupiter, where the scattered void spawn forces made their last desperate attempt to reach Earth. Admiral Wright commanded the combined fleet in a battle that lasted for 3 days and nights. Lisa Carter, now serving as the primary liaison between human and keeper forces, coordinated the complex joint operations from the command ship. Her unique understanding of both species' capabilities made her invaluable in planning attacks that maximized their combined strengths. The Keepers provide the technology and knowledge, she explained to her staff, but humans provide the creativity and determination. Together, we're stronger than either species could be alone. The war ended not with a climactic final battle, but with the gradual realization that the void spawn were retreating from the solar system entirely. The cosmic predators that had consumed countless civilizations across the galaxy were fleeing from humanity's unexpected resistance elder. Vex stood with Admiral Wright on the bridge of Terra's shield as they watched the last void spawn entities disappear into the darkness between stars. His alien features showed an emotion that might have been relief or perhaps pride. "Your species has exceeded even our highest expectations," he told Wright. "We hoped you would survive the invasion. We never dreamed you would drive them back so completely." Dr. Chris Taylor monitored the enemy withdrawal from his command center, tracking the void spawn as they fled toward the edge of the galaxy. The readings showed that the creatures were not just retreating from Earth, but from this entire region of space. "They're not just running from us," Taylor reported to the Global Command Network. "They're spreading the word to other void spawn entities. They're warning them to stay away from human space." The aftermath of the war brought changes that no one had anticipated. Humanity had not just survived the greatest threat in galactic history. They had become the threat that the void spawn feared. Other alien civilizations that had been hiding from the cosmic predators began to emerge from their hidden refuges.